Hi, so actually the next topic we're going to do in the Moxy Forum is one that's kind of been developing over the last couple of months, even though it's been a topic for a while. And especially there was a nice talk from Jem Arnold, who was a co-moderator last month, and Sean Seal, and they talked about this idea of nearest profiles during incremental exercise. And Jem showed some nice data there. I'll put the link down in the description of this YouTube video. And I'm sure we'll talk about it on the Moxy Forum. So that the idea is, well, what happens with your near signal as you basically progress through exercise intensities, or as you progress through a performance, through incremental performance. And so there's this paper by Spencer, which I often cite, and it identifies and says, well, essentially the best way to represent this data is through this kind of a linear regression with a breakpoint. They just do one breakpoint where you say, well, you essentially have a linear decline in your near signal. So SmO2 muscle oxygenation goes down linearly until you hit the breakpoint, then it flattens out until exhaustion. Which kind of, you see this image from Spencer right here showing that. And you do see this idea quite often. Now, I think this is to a certain extent a product of the protocol, which is something we can talk about in the forum. Nonetheless, it is something that we see, and it's what Jem and Sean in their talk are calling like this kind of linear profile. However, it's not the only profile that we see, and so just to clarify, HHB would be linear up. So deoxyhemoglobin would go linearly up until you find a breakpoint at the top, and then it flattens out. And oxyhemoglobin would do the opposite. We always talk about muscle oxygenation in terms of SmO2 usually, but those would be the other two parameters, if someone was asking that. And so I'm going to go through some data from a publication that should be coming out technically this month, so in June, but maybe it'll come out in July, we'll see, in human kinetics. And we did ramp tests with cyclists and with runners. I actually think I might have presented this data in the video earlier, but I'm not. I'd have to go back and look. Nonetheless, we're going to look at some profiles. And so the first profile that we can look at is this linear profile, which very much looks like Spencer's example. This is cycling, and you basically have this linear decline in muscle oxygenation, then it hit one breakpoint, it flattens out. So as you'd expect in that, right? But this is by no means the only example or the only path that muscle oxygenation can take. So if we take a second example, it's somewhat similar. You have a little bit of a plateau at the beginning. You might have like we call a first and a second breakpoint, a linear decline, and then you get this plateau at the end again. Both with relatively low SmO2s at the end, kind of around 20% lower. But you can also get a third, another profile you get, apart from this, what's called linear decline, is this maybe curvilinear profile or parabolic profile, where you get more of a longer flat plateau at the beginning. Sometimes these might even show up as somewhat positive slopes, which is a discussion we can have. And then you get a decrease later on that can be somewhat linear or not. And often then the decrease can get even steeper and steeper. So in this example, you see generally the SmO2 is pretty high. So an argument point here to me might be something like high adipose tissue, even though all these athletes didn't have specifically high adipose tissue. Then there's gender questions that come up as well. But you see this, but you can have this same profile at much lower SmO2. So you look at another example, it's essentially the same type of profile, or pretty similar, and you get this curvilinear drop off with no plateau at the end here as well. These are all cycling tests. Now, we also did, with the same athletes, we did running tests as well. So these are examples of some running tests where you can have the running test look very similar to this kind of linear decline with a plateau at the end. In this example here, or in the second example, where the plateau is not very long, but you have this linear decline to a breakpoint, it kind of flattens out. But you can also have more of a curvilinear response, at least in the terms of not finding a plateau at the end, where it just kind of bombs out at the end again like this. So these are all different kind of paths, and these are all ramp tests. So the performance increases are continuous essentially, and pretty fast, which may be a big reason in my argument. Everything you can get this linear drop response out of almost everyone by just cranking performance hop, increasing performance continuously quickly. You'll get a linear drop. Okay, but for that point, I think protocol is a big deal here. Why do these different protocols kind of happen? So I think part of it is, generally speaking, I think muscle selection is going to be a big one. So in cyclists, if you do VL, you generally find more this linear response, this plateau at the bottom. That's true. That was true for this data collection, but not for everyone. That's the point. It doesn't happen for everyone at all, but for most. And generally, that's associated with higher VO2 as well. The fitter, the more likely that VL response in cycling. For running, you kind of get generally the same response in that this plateau at the bottom. We did VLs for running as well, so not rectus femoris, where again you can debate placement here for sure. But for comparison, we did the VL as well. And again, generally, you would find more of this plateau at the bottom if the athletes were fitter, the higher VO2s, but not always the case. And in running, you found the plateaus less, which might have to do with the VL being less of maximally involved than in cycling, where a VL is really this dominant driving muscle, which is of course interesting. Which makes me think fat is always an issue. So we just discussed this, that fat tissue may be a problem, in that higher fat tissues would make more of this curvilinear drop off where you don't find the plateau. That I think is true, but not necessarily, in the sense that we do have athletes with the same fat tissues, where you have the same athlete in different training, different exercise modalities like running and cycling, where you get the two different profiles. So obviously it's not just fat that's making this happen. If then it's a combination of fat and exercise modality, muscle site selection, for example, that's making this happen, at least in my opinion. So we can debate these things a little bit. Again, Jem had some good inputs in that video. I would recommend that as well to take a look. But what's certain, I think, is the case is these very low plateaus that we find are interesting, because I do think that's something like meeting close to kind of maximal extraction. So basically, you get into like a kind of diffusion limitation going on here, where potentially you've kind of driven down your microcirculation PO2 with high extraction, and now you've bottomed out what you can extract. I think that's possible, and just so the fact being that all of these individuals can get down to, if you do occlusions, all these individuals can get down to 10%. So the ones that you see in these examples where they kind of, even if they have a plateau that's at 20%, they can actually get lower than that if you do an occlusion. So which is interesting. So obviously, once they have a high oxygen supply driving into the muscle, they can't actually extract in a relative sense down as far, which is interesting for sure. And they bottom out, whereas these steeper drop-offs are interesting because they never actually bottom out anywhere, and they just get this increased steep drop down towards at the very end of exercise, which seems to indicate that there's still potential to keep extracting there. But they never actually maximize that potential. Maybe we can talk about that in the Moxy Forum. So I can put comments here as well. Put comments in there. I think it's an interesting topic, especially Jem and Sean kind of put this in the forefront of my brain. So I thought we should address it in the Moxy Summit. Yeah, thank you for listening. Come to the Moxy Summit. We'll talk about it. Moxy Summit. The Moxy Summit's going to happen in October. Come to the Moxy Forum. We'll talk about it. Get excited for the Moxy Summit in October. We're going to have a good lineup of speakers coming. So thank you very much. Bye.